Come closer, settle in, and let the sounds of the world fade away. Here, in the quiet of this late hour, there is only the soft whisper of turning pages and the steady, patient flame of a single candle. We are in a library of forgotten things, a place where stories that were deemed too strange, too wild, or too inconvenient are kept safe in the silent company of dust and shadows. The candle on this ancient oak desk burns with a peculiar steadiness, as if it knows it must last through this entire tale. Its light catches on the gold lettering of leather-bound spines, each containing narratives that history tried to forget. The air here smells of old paper and beeswax, of secrets sealed away for centuries, of truths that were deemed too powerful for ordinary daylight. Most stories, you know, have a clear beginning. They are written in bold ink on the main page, but some tales, the most interesting ones, are not written at all. They are found in the margins, in the spaces between the lines. They are whispers passed down through generations, changing shape with each telling, but always retaining a core of profound and unsettling truth. Tonight, we will listen to one such whisper. It is a story that comes before a more famous one, before the rib, before the serpent, before the apple. There was a different dawn in the Garden of Eden, a dawn of two lights, not one. This is the secret story of Lilith, the queen of the night. Let the warmth of your blankets be your sanctuary, and let my voice be your guide into the shadows of a history you were never meant to hear. As I open this particular book, dust motes dance in the candlelight like tiny spirits awakened from slumber. The pages are yellowed with age, written in a script that seems to shift between Hebrew, Aramaic, and something older, something that predates written language itself. These are not just words on a page, they are echoes of ancient voices, preserved here in this sanctuary of forgotten knowledge. Let your mind drift back beyond memory, back beyond history, back to the very edge of existence itself. Before there was light and darkness as we know them, there was the Ein Sof, the infinite, the endless one. In the mystical tradition of the Kabbalah, this was the state of pure divine potential, a unity so complete that it contained all possibilities within itself. The creation of the world, the mystics tell us, began with a divine contraction, a tzimtzum. The infinite withdrew into itself, creating a void, a sacred emptiness where existence could unfold. Into this void, divine light poured forth, contained in vessels of increasing density, each one a step away from pure spirit and toward material reality. This is the cosmology that frames our story. For Lilith's tale is not merely about a woman and a man in a garden. It is about the fundamental tensions that exist at the heart of creation itself. Unity and separation, equality and hierarchy, freedom and submission, the wild and the tamed. Imagine now the air in the Garden of Eden. It is not just air, but a living warmth, thick with the scent of blossoms that have never known blight, and the rich, damp smell of freshly watered earth. The light that filters through the leaves of immense ancient trees is the color of pure honey. Every blade of grass pulses with divine vitality, Every flower opens its petals in perfect synchronization with the breathing of the universe itself. The garden is not merely a place, it is a state of being. Here, thought and reality are not yet fully separated. Desire and fulfillment exist in the same moment. The lion lies with the lamb not through suppression of its nature, but because the very concept of predation has not yet been conceived. This is existence before the knowledge of good and evil, before the splitting of the world into opposites. In the heart of this perfect creation, on the sixth day, a miracle occurs. From the sacred soil, the Adama, the Creator, fashions a human form. But the old whispers tell a different version of this story than the one you may have heard. They say the Creator did not form one being, but two. From the very same earth, at the very same moment, two figures were given the breath of life. The ancient text, known as the alphabet of Ben Sira, written in the medieval period but drawing on much older oral traditions, preserves this alternative narrative. It tells us that when the Holy One, blessed be He, created the first human, He created them double-faced, back to back, and then split them apart. Another interpretation suggests that they were created side by side, from the same handful of dust, in the same divine breath. One was Adam, whose name means from the earth. The other was Lilith, whose name echoes through older languages, connecting to the Sumerian word Lilitu, meaning wind spirit, and to the Hebrew word Layla, meaning night. She was not his shadow, nor his afterthought. She was his equal in every way. Where Adam's form was perhaps broader, more solid, Lilith's was lithe and quick. Her mind was as sharp as his, perhaps sharper, for she seemed to understand intuitively the names of things before they were spoken. Her spirit was as bright, burning with the same divine spark that animated all of creation. Her hair was the color of the night sky just before the stars appear, that deep blue-black that contains within it all the mysteries of the cosmos. Her eyes held the deep knowing wisdom of the earth from which she was made, but also something else, a wildness, an untamed quality that reflected the parts of creation that would never submit to cultivation. Together, they walked through the garden as partners. Their laughter was a single harmonious sound as they gave names to the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. When Adam would point to a creature and speak a name, Lilith would often laugh and offer an alternative, and they would debate with joy and without rancor which name better captured the essence of the being before them. There was no hierarchy in those early days, no question of who would lead and who would follow. When they walked side by side. When they rested, they lay as equals beneath the great tree of life, whose branches stretched up to heaven and whose roots reached down to the deepest waters beneath the earth. There was only the perfect, balanced rhythm of two souls exploring the dawn of the world, side by side. In the cool of the evening, when the divine presence would move through the garden like a gentle breeze, both Adam and Lilith would converse with their Creator. They would share their discoveries of the day, the new wonders they had found, the patterns they had observed in the movement of clouds and the growth of plants. The Creator delighted in their observations, for through their eyes the divine could experience creation from within creation itself. For a time, it was paradise, not just in place, but in principle. This was existence as it was meant to be, conscious beings in perfect harmony with their environment, with each other, and with the divine source of all being. But paradise, even one made by a perfect hand, is a fragile thing. The harmony that defined their days began to fray, not with a loud tear, but with a quiet, insistent tension. Like a single discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony, something shifted in the relationship between the first two humans. The change was subtle at first. Adam began to walk slightly ahead when they explored the garden. When they named the animals, he began to announce his choices with more authority, expecting Lilith to agree rather than offer alternatives. When they sat together in the evening, he would position himself slightly higher on the hillside so that he looked down at her rather than across. Lilith noticed these changes, but at first she attributed them to the natural variations that occur in any relationship. Perhaps Adam was simply feeling more confident in his role as co-caretaker of the garden. Perhaps his slightly more solid build made him naturally inclined to take the lead in certain physical tasks. She continued to assert her own perspectives, gently correcting course when Adam seemed to forget their fundamental equality. But the tension grew. The dispute, the legends say, crystallized around a question of position, of posture. In their intimate moments when they would come together as one flesh, Adam began to insist that she should always lie beneath him, to take what he saw as the naturally subordinate position. This was not merely about physical arrangement. In the symbolic language of ancient texts, position represents spiritual and social hierarchy. To be above is to dominate, to be below is to submit. Adam was not simply requesting a particular physical arrangement. He was asserting a fundamental reorganization of their relationship. Lilith's response was not one of anger, at least not at first. It was one of bewilderment. She could not understand how Adam could look at her, formed from the same earth, animated by the same divine breath, and see anything other than an equal. "Why must I lie beneath you?" she asked, her voice calm but firm with conviction. "We are equals, for we were both created from the same earth. I am not of you, nor you of me. We are each of the earth and of the breath of the divine." It was a simple statement of fact, but in it the perfect harmony of the garden was broken. The crack that appeared in their relationship was like the first crack in a perfect vessel. Once present, it could only grow wider. Adam's response revealed how deeply his thinking had changed. He argued that although they were created from the same substance, he had been formed first, though this itself was a matter of interpretation, as their creation had been simultaneous. He claimed that his greater physical strength gave him natural authority. He even suggested that the Creator intended for there to be an order to things, with him at the head. Lilith listened to Adam's arguments with growing disbelief and sorrow. She saw in his words not just a misunderstanding, but a fundamental betrayal of what they had been to each other. The partner who had laughed with her as they named the butterflies, who had marveled with her at the patterns of the stars, was now claiming dominion over her.
She tried to reason with him. She reminded him of their first days when their joy had been in their partnership. She pointed out that in all of creation there were many forms of relationship. The trees did not dominate the earth from which they grew. The rivers did not command the rain that fed them. Everything existed in reciprocal harmony. Why should their relationship be different? But Adam had made up his mind. Perhaps it was loneliness that drove him to seek control, the need to define himself by having power over another. Perhaps it was fear of Lilith's wild spirit, her connection to the untamed aspects of creation. Or perhaps it was simply the first manifestation of the desire for hierarchy that would plague humanity throughout its history. The arguments grew more heated. Where once their voices had blended in harmony, now they clashed in discord. The animals of the garden grew restless, sensing the disturbance in the peace of their world. The very air seemed to thicken with tension. It was then that Lilith made her fateful decision. She saw that there was no place for her in this version of paradise. If paradise required her submission, then it was no paradise at all. If Adam could only conceive of their relationship in terms of dominance and subordination, then their relationship was already ended. Standing in a shaft of moonlight, for this confrontation significantly took place at night, Lilith drew herself up to her full height. Her hair moved as if stirred by a wind that touched nothing else in the garden. Her eyes blazed with a light that was not reflected, but seemed to come from within. And then, in a moment of profound and desperate resolve, she did the unthinkable. She spoke the ineffable name of God, the sacred secret name that contains within it the power of creation itself. This name, the Tetragrammaton, was not meant to be spoken by created beings. It was the name that had called the universe into existence, the vibration that sustained all reality. How did Lilith know this name? The texts suggest various possibilities. Perhaps in her perfect state of initial creation, she retained knowledge that would later be hidden. Perhaps in her deep communion with the earth and its creatures, she had learned secrets that Adam, in his increasing focus on dominion, had missed. Or perhaps, in her moment of ultimate need, the name came to her as a gift from the divine presence itself, which understood that her nature could not survive in captivity.
The speaking of the ineffable name was not an act of defiance against her creator, but a final, sacred appeal to the very source of her being. As the syllables left her lips, the entire garden seemed to hold its breath. The leaves stopped their rustling. The streams paused in their flow. Even the stars seemed to freeze in their courses. The name itself cannot be written, cannot be truly conveyed in human language. It is said to contain within it all the names of God, all the aspects of divinity, all the creative and destructive powers of the universe. To speak it is to momentarily channel the force that spins galaxies and ignites suns. As Lilith spoke the name, her body began to transform. The solid flesh that bound her to the earth became lighter, more ethereal. Wings, dark as the space between stars, unfurled from her back. They were not the feathered wings of birds, nor the membranous wings of bats, but something altogether other. Wings made of night itself, of dreams and shadows given form. Adam watched in horror and awe as Lilith rose from the ground.
For a moment, she hovered there, looking down at him with an expression of infinite sadness. In her eyes he could see reflected all the futures that might have been, children they might have raised together in equality, discoveries they might have made, the perfect partnership that had been within their grasp and was now lost forever. "I cannot stay where I cannot be myself," she said, and her voice carried the sound of wind through ancient caves, of waves against distant shores. "I was created free, and free I shall remain." With that she rose higher, her wings carrying her up and up, through the canopy of the garden, past the flaming sword that would later guard its entrance, beyond the boundaries of paradise itself. She flew until she was just a dark star against the night sky, and then even that disappeared. Adam stood alone in the garden for the first time. The silence that surrounded him was deafening. He called out to her, first in anger, then in confusion, and finally in grief. But his voice echoed back to him unanswered. The animals, which had always approached him and Lilith with trust, now seemed wary, as if they sensed that something fundamental had broken in the order of creation. Lilith's journey took her far from the lush greens of Eden. She flew over lands that had never known human footsteps, over waters that had never reflected a human face. She flew until exhaustion overtook even her supernatural strength, and she came to rest on the shores of the Red Sea. The Red Sea, in Hebrew, Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, would later become the site of the Israelites' liberation from Egypt. But in these primordial times, it was a place of primal power, where the waters of creation still remembered their first separation from the waters above. Here, the world was painted in shades of ochre and crimson. The shores were crusted with salt that glittered under a relentless sun, and the water stretched out, a vast and lonely expanse of deep blue. This wilderness became her home. The landscape matched something in her soul, vast, untamed, beautiful in its starkness. Here there were no gardens to tend, no paths to follow. There was only the raw interaction between elements, wind and wave, sand and stone, fire and water. In this desolate place, Lilith discovered something unexpected: freedom. For the first time, she was entirely herself, undefined by anyone else's expectations or demands. She learned to draw sustenance from the desert plants that grew in hidden valleys. She discovered oases that appeared only under certain stars. She befriended the creatures of the wilderness, the owls that hunted by night, the serpents that knew the secret ways through the rocks, the wild cats that moved like shadows across the dunes. But she also discovered loneliness. In the garden, even with the growing tension between herself and Adam, she had been part of something larger. Here, she was singular, unique, isolated. The freedom she had claimed came at the cost of connection. It was in this state of liberated isolation that she began to change. The texts speak mysteriously of what happened to Lilith in the wilderness, but they suggest that she became something other than purely human. Some say she took lovers from among the spirits of the desert, the jinn and ifrits that dwelled in the waste places. Others say that her transformation was internal, that in embracing her freedom so completely, she transcended the limitations of human form. She gave birth, the legends say, to 100 children each day, but these were not human children. They were the Lilim, spirits of the night, beings of wind and shadow that inherited their mother's freedom and her curse of separation. These children dispersed across the world, becoming the spirits that would forever inhabit the margins, the wild places, the shadows that civilization could never quite illuminate. Meanwhile, in the Garden of Eden, Adam's complaint reached the ears of the Creator. The first man was disconsolate. He had discovered that naming the animals and tending the garden meant little without someone to share these tasks. His attempt to assert dominance had cost him the very partnership he had sought to control. The Creator, in divine wisdom that encompasses both justice and mercy, did not immediately create a replacement for Lilith. Instead, 3 angels were dispatched to negotiate her return. These were not ordinary angels, but powerful beings whose names carried authority over different aspects of creation. Their names were Senoi, Sansenoi, and Semangaloth. Each name contains within it powers of binding and loosing, of protection and enforcement. Senoi, whose name means the hated one, understood rejection and isolation. Sansenoi, the one who changes, knew about transformation and adaptation. Semangaloth, the sign of God's word, carried the authority of divine decree. The 3 angels found Lilith by the shores of the Red Sea. She was seated on a throne of driftwood and bones, her dark wings wrapped around her like a cloak. Her children, the spirits she had brought into being, swirled around her like a living storm of shadows. She had become something magnificent and terrible, a queen of the margins, a sovereign of the spaces between. The angels delivered their message with the formal precision of divine messengers. Lilith, who was formed from the earth alongside Adam, you are commanded to return to the Garden of Eden. The Creator has heard Adam's lament and desires the restoration of the original harmony. Lilith laughed, and her laughter was like the sound of wind through empty ruins. Return, to be beneath one who sees me as lesser. I was created equal, and equal I remain. If Adam cannot accept this, then there is no harmony to restore. The angels, bound by their mission, presented the ultimatum they had been given. If you do not return, 100 of your children will die each day. This is the consequence of defying the divine order. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Lilith's expression changed, the defiance replaced by something deeper, a mother's anguish. She looked at the spirits that surrounded her, her strange children born of freedom and wildness. To save them, she would need to surrender everything she had become. What followed was not the simple acceptance or refusal that the angels expected, but a negotiation that would echo through history. Lilith, drawing on powers she had discovered in her exile, proposed a covenant, a binding agreement that would define her relationship with humanity for all time. I accept the fate you have pronounced upon my children, she said, and each word seemed to cost her greatly. But in return, I claim my own dominion. I will have power over all newborn children, males for 8 days after birth, females for 20. This is the price of my exile. The angels were taken aback. This was not a simple submission to divine will.
but a counteroffer that acknowledged her power even as it accepted her punishment. They conferred among themselves, their voices harmonizing in tones that human ears could not process. "And what limitation will you accept on this power?" Sansanoi asked, understanding that all power must have boundaries. Lilith considered. In her eyes, the angels could see the struggle between her nature as a mother and her nature as a rebel, between her desire for revenge and her understanding of justice. "I will have no power over any child protected by an amulet bearing your 3 names," she declared. "Let this be a sign of our covenant. Those who acknowledge this agreement, who respect the power I have claimed, even as they seek protection from it, will be safe from my touch." It was a complex agreement, one that acknowledged Lilith's autonomy while also providing a means of protection against her power. The angels, recognizing that this was perhaps the best resolution possible, agreed. But Lilith had one more condition. Furthermore, she said, "I claim dominion over the spaces that civilization rejects, the wilderness, the night, the dreams that come unbidden, the thoughts that arise from the shadows of the mind. These will be my realm, and in them I will be sovereign." And so the covenant was sealed. Lilith would not return to Eden, would never again be the partner Adam had rejected. But neither would she be destroyed or truly banished. She would exist in the margins, in the wild places, in the aspects of existence that could never be fully tamed or controlled.
The tradition of the amulets began immediately. The angels, before departing, taught humanity how to create protective charms. These were not simple magical objects, but sophisticated spiritual technologies that acknowledged the complex relationship between order and chaos, civilization and wildness. The amulets would bear the names of the 3 angels, often written in a spiraling pattern that mimicked the cycle of day and night. Sometimes they would include an image of Lilith herself, not as a monster to be feared, but as a power to be respectfully acknowledged. The most effective amulets, it was said, were those created with understanding rather than fear. In Jewish communities throughout the centuries, these amulets would be hung above cribs, sewn into swaddling clothes, or drawn on the walls of birthing rooms. They were particularly important during the first 8 days of a male child's life and the first 20 days of a female child's life, the periods when Lilith's claim was strongest. But the amulets were more than just protection. They were reminders of a primal story, of the first fracture in human relationships, of the price of freedom and the cost of dominance. Each amulet was, in its way, a small acknowledgement that the world contains forces that cannot be controlled, only negotiated with. The tradition evolved over time. In medieval Jewish communities, the amulets became elaborate works of art, incorporating not just the angels' names, but entire prayers, biblical verses, and mystical symbols. Some included the image of a hand representing divine protection. Others featured the Star of David, the seal of Solomon, who was said to have power over spirits. But always at their heart was the triangular relationship between the 3 angels' names, forming a protective barrier against the Queen of the Night. And sometimes, in the very center of the most powerful amulets, was a small space left deliberately empty, an acknowledgement that even in protection there must be room for the wild, the free, the untamed. As centuries passed, Lilith's story was buried beneath layers of fear and misunderstanding. The tale of the woman made of earth was replaced by the tale of the woman made from a rib. Eve became the first woman, created specifically to be a helper to Adam, fashioned from his own body rather than independently from the earth. This new narrative served a purpose. It established a clear hierarchy, with woman derived from man rather than created equal to him. It made submission seem natural, divinely ordained. Eve's subsequent temptation by the serpent and the fall from Eden became a cautionary tale about the dangers of female independence and curiosity. But Lilith's story never entirely disappeared. It survived in whispers, in folk tales, in the prayers of women who felt the constraints of their subordination. It survived in the alphabet of Ben Sira, a satirical text from the medieval period that preserved the story even while adding its own embellishments. It survived in the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, where Lilith appears as a complex figure connected to the divine feminine aspect known as the Shekinah. In these later texts, Lilith's character became increasingly demonized. She was transformed from a woman seeking equality into a night demon who preyed on children and seduced men in their sleep. She was blamed for nocturnal emissions, for crib death, for miscarriages. Every unexplained tragedy that befell a child was attributed to her malevolence. She was tied to the night, to the desolate cry of the screech owl, which in Hebrew is called Lilith, to the sudden chilling gust of wind that makes the candle flicker. She became a succubus, a vampire, a shapeshifter who could appear as a beautiful woman to lure men to their doom. But even in these demonized versions, something of her original nature persisted. She remained associated with independence, with sexuality outside the bounds of marriage, with the refusal to submit. She became a figure both feared and, secretly, admired by those who felt the constraints of their own situations. To truly understand Lilith, we must look even further back before the Hebrew texts to the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. In Sumerian mythology, we find the Lilitu, a class of wind and storm demons. These beings were associated with desolation and wild spaces, with the wind that carries disease, with the spaces where civilization ends. The word Lilitu is related to the Sumerian word Lil, meaning wind or spirit. These were not necessarily evil beings, but they were dangerous because they existed outside the boundaries of ordered society. They represented the forces of nature that could not be controlled by human will or divine decree. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest literary works, there is a reference to a Lilitu dwelling in the trunk of a tree. The tree had been planted by the goddess Inanna in her garden, but it had become inhabited by unwanted beings, a serpent at its roots, the Anzu bird in its crown, and the Lilitu in its trunk.
Gilgamesh helps Inanna by driving out these creatures, including the Lilith who flees to the wilderness. This ancient story contains many of the elements that would later appear in Lilith's tale. The association with trees like the tree of life in Eden, the connection to serpents, the flight to wild places when confronted by male power. It suggests that Lilith's story draws on much older traditions about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, between the ordered world and the chaotic forces that lurk at its edges. The Babylonian texts speak of the Ardat Lili, the maiden of desolation, who was believed to be the spirit of young women who died unmarried. Unable to fulfill their natural role as wives and mothers, these spirits became dangerous, seducing men and causing them to waste away. This tradition connects female autonomy with danger, suggesting that women who exist outside traditional roles are inherently threatening. In the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, Lilith takes on even more complex dimensions. She becomes not just a historical figure or a demon, but a cosmic principle, a necessary part of the divine structure of reality. According to Kabbalistic teaching, Lilith is associated with the Sitra Achra, the other side, the realm of divine judgment untempered by mercy. She is linked to the Sephirah of Gevurah, divine strength and severity, when it becomes unbalanced and separated from Chesed, divine love and kindness. In this reading, Lilith represents the principle of strict justice without compassion, of strength without gentleness. Her exile from Eden becomes a metaphor for the cosmic imbalance that occurred when severity became separated from mercy. Her redemption, which some Kabbalistic texts hint at, would involve the reunification of these divine principles. The Zohar describes Lilith as the wife of Samael, the angel of death, and together they rule over the forces of impurity. But even here, there is complexity. Lilith and Samael are sometimes described as the shadow or dark mirror of the divine couple, the Holy One and the Shekinah. They represent what happens when divine energies become inverted or misdirected. Some Kabbalistic texts suggest that Lilith has two aspects, the greater Lilith and the lesser Lilith. The greater Lilith is the cosmic principle, the force of unrestrained judgment. The lesser Lilith is the more personal demon, the one who threatens children and seduces men. This division suggests an understanding that Lilith operates on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. In certain mystical practices, advanced practitioners would actually seek to encounter Lilith, not to worship her, but to understand and integrate the shadow aspects of existence she represents. This was dangerous work, requiring extensive preparation and protection, but it was seen as necessary for achieving complete spiritual understanding.
In recent decades, Lilith has undergone yet another transformation. Feminist scholars and spiritual seekers have reclaimed her not as a demon, but as a symbol of female autonomy and power. They have looked past the layers of demonization to find the original story of a woman who refused to accept subordination. In this modern reading, Lilith becomes a heroine rather than a villain. Her refusal to submit to Adam is seen not as prideful rebellion, but as a legitimate assertion of equality. Her exile becomes not a punishment, but a choice for freedom over comfortable subjugation. Her transformation into a demon is understood as the way patriarchal societies typically portray strong, independent women. Modern Jewish feminists have created new rituals incorporating Lilith as a positive figure. There are Lilith magazines, Lilith funds for women's causes, Lilith fairs celebrating women's creativity. She has been reclaimed as a patron of women's independence, creativity, and sexuality. Some modern practitioners have created new prayers and meditations addressing Lilith not as a demon to be warded off, but as an aspect of the divine feminine to be honored. They see in her the dark moon goddess, the crone wisdom, the wild woman archetype that has been suppressed in many religious traditions. This reclamation is not without controversy. Traditional religious authorities point out that Lilith has been associated with infant death and sexual impropriety for centuries. They argue that attempting to rehabilitate her image is dangerous, potentially inviting negative spiritual forces. But perhaps this ongoing debate about Lilith's nature is itself part of her essence. She remains a figure who cannot be easily categorized, who exists in the tensions between opposing forces, who refuses to be simplified into either pure evil or pure good. As night deepens around us, let us consider where Lilith dwells now in our modern world. She's no longer found in the physical wilderness. Most of that has been mapped, tamed, developed. But she persists in other wild spaces, the ones that exist within the human psyche and experience. She is present in the dreams that come unbidden, the ones that show us aspects of ourselves we prefer not to acknowledge. She dwells in the shadow, in the psychological sense that Carl Jung described, the rejected and hidden aspects of the personality that we push into unconsciousness because they don't fit our self-image or social expectations. She manifests in the moment of rebellion when someone says no to an unjust demand, even when submission would be easier. She is in the voice that speaks truth to power, regardless of consequences. She appears in the creative inspiration that comes from outside conventional thinking, in the art that disturbs rather than comforts. In our sleep, she visits not as a threatening demon, but as a reminder of what we have sacrificed for the sake of fitting in. She poses questions we avoid during our waking hours. What parts of yourself have you abandoned? What wildness have you tamed? What equality have you surrendered? She is particularly present in the experiences of those who find themselves outsiders, who cannot or will not conform to expected roles. The person who chooses solitude over an unsuitable partnership channels Lilith's choice. The individual who speaks an uncomfortable truth rather than maintaining a comfortable lie carries her spirit. There is a teaching in some mystical traditions that speaks of the tikkun, the cosmic repair that will eventually heal all divisions. In this ultimate redemption, even Lilith will be restored, not through submission, but through recognition. The wild and the civilized, the dark and the light, the masculine and feminine principles will achieve true balance, not through hierarchy, but through mutual respect. Some say that Lilith's exile was not a punishment, but a necessary stage in the evolution of consciousness. Humanity needed to experience the consequences of choosing dominance over partnership, of valuing control over connection. Only by seeing where this path leads can we choose differently. In this reading, Lilith becomes not just a figure from the past, but a teacher for the future. Her story reminds us that true paradise cannot be built on inequality, that harmony achieved through forced submission is not harmony at all. She stands as an eternal reminder that freedom, once tasted, cannot be forgotten. As the candle burns lower on this ancient desk, casting longer shadows across the forgotten library, we can imagine Lilith not as a vengeful demon, but as a patient teacher, waiting at the edges of consciousness for humanity to mature enough to understand her lesson. In the deepest mystical traditions, passed from teacher to student in whispers, there are teachings about Lilith that were never written down, only spoken in sacred spaces when the moon was dark. These teachings suggest that Lilith's story is encoded in the very structure of reality, in the patterns that repeat across all levels of existence. Consider the phases of the moon. The new moon, dark and hidden, is Lilith's time, the moment when the feminine principle withdraws completely, becoming invisible yet still present, still exerting its gravitational pull on the tides of earth and psyche. The full moon represents the feminine in harmony with the solar principle, reflecting light while maintaining its own nature. But the dark moon, the true absence of lunar light, that is when Lilith reigns supreme. In these secret teachings, practitioners would observe the dark moon as a time of profound introspection. They would fast and meditate, seeking to encounter within themselves the rejected aspects that Lilith represents. They understood that spiritual wholeness required acknowledging and integrating these shadow elements, not banishing them. The teachings spoke of Lilith's palace in the desert, not as a physical location, but as a state of consciousness accessible to those brave enough to venture into their own psychological wilderness. In this palace, built from moonlight and shadow, Lilith holds court over all the aspects of human nature that civilization tries to suppress: raw creativity, authentic sexuality, primal wisdom, the knowledge of death, the acceptance of chaos. Those who claim to have visited this palace in vision or dream described it as simultaneously beautiful and terrible. Its walls were made of black glass that reflected not your appearance, but your true nature.
Its corridors echoed with the songs of women throughout history who had chosen freedom over security, authenticity over acceptance.
Let us speak now more deeply of Lilith's children, the Lilim, those spirits born of her union with the desert winds and the ancient forces that predate human civilization. These beings are not merely demons in the conventional sense, but representatives of all that exists in the liminal spaces of reality. Each child of Lilith embodies a different aspect of the nocturnal consciousness. There are those who inspire dreams, not the gentle dreams of wish fulfillment, but the profound dreams that reveal hidden truths. There are those who guard the threshold between sleep and waking, that mysterious state where the conscious and unconscious minds briefly merge. Some of her children became the muses of artists and poets, inspiring works that challenged conventional morality and revealed uncomfortable truths. They whispered to Baudelaire as he wrote Les Fleurs du Mal, to Frida Kahlo as she painted her unflinching self-portraits, to Virginia Woolf as she explored the streams of consciousness that flow beneath proper society. Other children became the protectors of outcasts, the women accused of witchcraft, the individuals whose love didn't conform to accepted patterns, the mystics whose visions threatened established religious order. These spirits offered comfort to those who, like their mother, found themselves exiled for refusing to submit. But perhaps the most important of Lilith's children are those who exist within each human psyche. The impulses toward freedom, creativity, and authentic self-expression that we so often suppress. Every time someone chooses truth over comfortable lies, every time someone refuses to diminish themselves to make others comfortable, every time someone honors their wild nature despite social pressure to conform, one of Lilith's children stirs to life. The tradition teaches that we each carry within us both Eden and exile, both the desire for harmony and the need for autonomy. The children of Lilith represent our exiled aspects, the parts of ourselves we've sacrificed for the sake of belonging. They wait in the shadows of our consciousness, not as threats, but as potential allies in the quest for wholeness. Lilith speaks, but not in words as we understand them. Her language is the language of shadows, of the spaces between things, of what is implied but never stated directly. To understand her communications, one must learn to read absence as readily as presence, to hear the silence between sounds, to see the darkness that defines light. In this language, every shadow cast by sunlight contains a message about what blocks the light. Every silence in a conversation reveals what cannot or will not be said. Every absence, the empty chair at the table, the unused room in the house, the name never spoken, tells Lilith's story anew. She communicates through synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem to violate the laws of probability, the book that falls open to exactly the right page, the stranger who speaks the words you needed to hear, the dream that provides the solution to a problem you couldn't solve while awake. These are Lilith's whispers, reminders that there are patterns and connections beyond what rational thought can grasp. Her language includes the symptoms that manifest in bodies when spirits are constrained, the throat that closes when truth is suppressed, the heart that races when authentic desire is denied, the insomnia that comes when we refuse to face what emerges in darkness. These physical manifestations are Lilith's alphabet, spelling out messages about the cost of living inauthentically. She speaks through the natural world, particularly through creatures associated with night and margin. The owl's call at midnight, the bat's silent flight, the cat's independent nature, all carry echoes of her voice. The plants that bloom only in darkness, the fungi that thrive in shadow, the deep-sea creatures that generate their own light in the absence of the sun, all are her texts, teaching about other ways of being. Understanding this language requires a different kind of literacy, one that values intuition alongside logic, that recognizes wisdom in chaos as well as in order, that finds truth in poetry as much as in prose. It is a language that cannot be mastered through study alone, but must be absorbed through experience, through the willingness to encounter one's own shadows.
In our current age, something remarkable is happening. The rigid structures that have kept Lilith in exile for millennia are beginning to crack. Not through revolution or violence, but through a gradual recognition that the imbalance between masculine and feminine principles has led humanity to the brink of catastrophe. The exile of Lilith can be read as a metaphor for the suppression of the feminine principle in Western civilization. Not just the oppression of women, though that is certainly part of it, but the denial of qualities associated with the feminine: intuition, receptivity, cyclical rather than linear thinking, cooperation rather than competition, being rather than doing. For thousands of years, these qualities were relegated to the shadows, considered inferior to the masculine principles of logic, action, hierarchy, and control. But as we face ecological collapse, endless conflicts, and profound spiritual emptiness, there is a growing recognition that what we exiled might be exactly what we need for survival. Lilith's return is not about replacing masculine with feminine, not about creating a new hierarchy with a different group on top. It is about recognizing that both principles are necessary, that they are complementary rather than oppositional, that true paradise requires their equal partnership. This return manifests in many ways. In the reclaiming of indigenous wisdom that honors the earth as sacred rather than viewing it as resource, in new economic models that prioritize sustainability and community over endless growth, in approaches to conflict resolution that seek restoration rather than punishment, in spiritual practices that honor the body and emotions alongside mind and spirit. Each of these shifts represents a small crack in the wall that has kept Lilith in exile. Each person who chooses partnership over dominance, who values being as much as achieving, who honors the wisdom of darkness alongside the clarity of light, participates in her return. In the deepest mysteries, there is a teaching about the ultimate reconciliation. It speaks of a sacred marriage, not between Lilith and Adam. That possibility was lost in the garden, but between Lilith and her own divine nature. And through that, a healing of the primordial split in creation itself. This sacred marriage is not an external event, but an internal process that occurs within each individual who undertakes the work of integration. It requires acknowledging both the Adam and Lilith within, the part that seeks order and the part that demands freedom, the part that wants to belong and the part that needs to be authentic. The process is alchemical, transforming the base metal of unconscious conflict into the gold of conscious integration. It requires descending into one's own depths, encountering the rejected and feared aspects of the self, and recognizing them not as enemies but as exiled parts of one's wholeness. In this sacred marriage, the traditional roles dissolve. There is no above or below, no dominant or submissive. There is instead a dance, a dynamic interaction where sometimes one leads and sometimes the other, where both partners maintain their individual essence while creating something greater through their union. This is not the marriage that Adam offered Lilith based on hierarchy and possession. This is a marriage of equals, a union that enhances rather than diminishes each partner's nature. It is the marriage that could have been in Eden if ego had not intervened, the partnership that humanity lost and has been trying to rediscover ever since. When this internal sacred marriage occurs, Lilith is no longer experienced as a threatening force, but as a powerful ally. Her wildness becomes creative inspiration. Her independence becomes the strength to stand for truth. Her sexuality becomes the sacred life force that connects all beings. Her darkness becomes the fertile void from which all possibilities emerge.
And so, as our candle burns down to its final moments, casting one last dance of shadows across the walls of this forgotten library, we come to the end of Lilith's story. Or perhaps more accurately, we come to the place where her story intersects with yours. The book before us begins to close, its ancient pages whispering secrets as they fold back together. But the story doesn't end here. It continues in every choice between submission and authenticity, in every moment when we must decide whether to honor our wild nature or suppress it for the sake of acceptance. Lilith remains at the edges of our consciousness, neither demon nor angel, but something more complex, a reminder of what we lose when we choose security over freedom, conformity over truth. She is the path not taken, the word not spoken, the self not expressed, but she is also the possibility that always remains the potential for reclaiming what we've sacrificed. As you lie there on the edge of sleep, do not think of her as a demon to be feared or a goddess to be worshipped. Think of her as a secret, a forgotten truth that lives within your own shadow. Let her story be not a source of fear, but a strange and soothing lullaby, a reminder of the quiet, resilient power that resides in the deepest, most hidden corners of the night. Perhaps in your dreams tonight you will find yourself in a vast library where all the rejected stories are kept. Perhaps you will walk its corridors of shadow and moonlight, discovering the tales that were deemed too dangerous for daylight. Perhaps you will even glimpse her there, the Queen of the Night, no longer in exile but finally at home in the sacred darkness that gave her birth. Or perhaps you will simply sleep deep and dreamless, carried into rest by the rhythm of this ancient tale. Either way, know that you have heard a story that was meant to be forgotten, a whisper that refused to be silenced, a truth that survived millennia of burial to reach your ears tonight. The library is closing now. The whispers are fading. The candle gives one last flicker, painting the walls with the final sweep of golden light before darkness claims the room. There is nothing left to do but surrender to the embrace of night, where Lilith reigns not as a tyrant but as a guardian of rest, a protector of dreams, a keeper of the sacred darkness that cradles all sleeping things. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. And in your sleeping, remember, every night is an opportunity to visit the wild places within yourself, to encounter the exiled aspects of your nature, to dance with shadows in the moonlight of your dreams. This is Lilith's gift, not curse, but blessing, not exile, but homecoming, not ending, but eternal return. The story is complete. The book is closed. The candle is extinguished. Rest now in the ancient darkness where all stories begin and end. Sleep now. Sleep well.